Onomastic maneuvers. The honored elderly citizens of the Mangistau region propose to rename Zhanaozen into Beketata. Mangistau youth confronts the elders. Journalistic conscience. Bringing president's will into life through the adoption of the ethic code for reporters. The moral and ethic guidelines in the matter of conscience. Bahit's happiness. The 6-year-old Bahit was born in slavery on the outskirts of Moscow. Expect no wedding. The ancient Kyrgyz custom of bride kidnapping gets a modern interpretation. Hello, I'm Asylbek Abdulov and you're watching Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel. Instead of going to hell, sinners from Zhanaozen go back to their town. It's a local saying that hints at harsh environment and poor living conditions over the Mangislak plateau. But after the events of December 2011, the saying gets an entirely new connotation. In June of 1989, close to the collapse of the Soviet Union, the area was known for major riots based on ethnic grounds. Similar to recent events, troops were deployed in the city, leading up to shootings and casualties. The city was called New Azen since the day it was founded in 1968, but then was renamed to Zhanaozen in 1993. Now the initiative to rename the distressed city is back on the agenda.
The Housing and Public Utilities Company Azenjalu is holding an unscheduled meeting at the request of local authorities. The topic of the day is renaming Zhanaozen into Beketata. We gathered here to find out whether the public supports the renaming idea. So far, 3 people spoke out in support of the idea, the other 3 speakers against it. Most workers are voting against the idea. They believe politics is behind it. I believe the authorities are attempting to cover up for their disgrace. So many people have died, the land is soaked with blood, but now they want a new name. What for? News of a possible name change broke out in state-run media on Kurban Ait. The action group is headed by an honorary resident of Zhanaozen, chairman of the Veterans Council, Asylbek Aydarov. I think our idea will gain support. We want to instill a love for history and culture in young people. We want to educate them spiritually. The elder Aydarov is famous among townspeople as a creative person with a number of ideas. The year before last, for instance, Aydarov proposed to rename Zhanaozen into Nurazen after the word Nur Sultan. The 81-year-old Andabai is also a respected elder. At a regional museum tour, he is telling school children that the name Zhanaozen takes its root from ancient history. The name Ozen is 300 years old. As a kid, he heard that a big river flowed across town. The author of this idea is pitting local residents against the authorities. The December 16th tragedy is still fresh on people's minds. They will be against these changes. I can tell you in full confidence that this initiative did not come from the Veterans Council. This is not these elders' initiative, but Astana's and Akurdaz. Without a doubt, they gave the order. Besides, offering to name the town Beketata is disrespectful towards the memory of our ancestors. It is completely wrong to disturb their resting spirits. Beketata is a famous healer, prophet and spiritual teacher who lived in the 18th century. Today, Beketata's mausoleum is considered a holy place. Hundreds of people seeking help visit it every day. Not a single city will ever disappear, because archaeology is revealing many secrets nowadays. Archaeologist Arnabai Nurjanov is excavating the ancient city of Aspara with his exploratory group. According to various data, Aspara was part of the Turkic Khanate from the 6th to the 16th century. Until the 13th century, it was known as Usugulay. As an expert and citizen, Arnabai Nurjanov is categorically against the modern rebranding of Zhanaozen. I am against renaming Zhanaozen. The city did not exist when Beketata was alive. He has nothing to do with it. It was renamed from New Azen into Zhanaozen after the tragic events of 1989. Even if they do rename it again, the people will still remember the inter-ethnic conflict of that period, as well as the bloodshed of 2011. This is Uralsk. It was called Yaitsky in the 16th century. This is a house built in that period. Inside the house, the famous rioter Yemelyan Pugachev declared himself Peter III and headed the Peasants' War. After their defeat in 1775, Empress Catherine II ordered to rename the river Yaik, or Zhaik in Kazakh language, into Ural. Thus, Yaitsky now became Uralsk. However, the rioter's name is forever ingrained in the history of the town. Yaitsky Cossacks had their own democratic republic with their own ruling system, their rights, and their chieftains. Catherine II renamed it after Pugachev's uprising in order to erase it from the people's memory. Khalikan Adilkhan has a tradition. Every Friday, the participant in the events of December 1986 lays flowers at the Zhaltaksan monument. Later on Independence Square, he remembers Kaldayakov's famous song. After that year's bloodshed on Brezhnev Square in Almaty, it was turned into a driveway. A shopping center now stands on one side while a car park is on the other. Zhanaozen 2011 is not a simple incident, but an uprising of the outraged, which was harshly suppressed. When you mention the word Zhanaozen, this tragedy comes immediately to mind. Changing the name means erasing the town's tragedy from its memory. Take a look at the shopping center in the square. It was built to prevent people from assembling and raising their spirits here. Our authorities are afraid of that. The name-changing subject was discussed heatedly in 2007, when Astana was proposed to carry the name of the first president. However, the national leader spoke out in no vague terms against it. In general, I am against giving streets, schools, cities, etc. people's names, like they love it here. This is history. Historic names are sacred, noted the president. The closer December 16th gets, the faster the campaign to rename Zhanaozen becomes. The initiative was taken up by local authorities. However, army garrisons still lining the town make it impossible to forget the fast approaching one-year anniversary of that Bloody Friday.
In general, the population is quite negative about this recent onomastic initiative on the part of the prominent local residents. Renaming the settlement is unlikely to bring any change to Zhanaozen. The proposed idea is rather a distraction, drawing back public attention away from the trials against 37 oil workers and Vladimir Kozlov, as well as the issue of prisoners' exoneration. Looks like the new production, directed by Bulat Atabayev, who was also involved in Zhanaozen case, is perfect metaphor for the current situation. People are closing the eyes of the dead, while the dead are opening the eyes of survivors. The play is rehearsed for premiere in Mainz, Germany. In the meantime, Aslan Musin, another citizen of Kazakhstan, is back from Germany, contrary to the rumors of his escape or even political exile. Not only he came back, but he also gave an interview. Given that Musin's communication with the press is quite seldom, it's assumed that the interview was insisted upon by his senior superiors. Questions themselves are stylistically closer to the president's administration, rather than Guljan.org website, which published Musin's answers. The former chief of staff gave free rein to his emotions at the key point of his interview, saying that he always was and still is an avid supporter of the great man, the founder of our state. Notably, the question already contained the correct answer, and in the end, it all kind of sounded like a vote. It's hard not to notice that other questions were based on the October interview with Rahat Aliyev about Musin's departure from the country. This is a tragedy that Nazarbayev fears, that the real motives and the mechanisms of ordering to shoot at peaceful residents will be revealed. That's why he is covering things up. Musin's answer. I learned about Zhanaozen violence on December 16, around 12:30, from reports of law enforcement agencies. Neither I nor the country leadership gave orders for the use of firearms. Here's another part of Aliyev's interview which warranted Musin's comment. He doesn't need what really happened in Zhanaozen to be revealed now, and everything what is happening around Musin is the continuation of the so-called bargain with Musin, because this is not a coincidence that he started pressuring via Financial Police, National Security Committee, and through Abakayev, the head of the region. We all know that he was a close associate of Musin, with an aim to remove Musin from the position of chief of staff, and of course Musin, as a sober-minded man, took a time out and left for Germany. Aslan Musin said regarding his links with Birgiris Kaliyev, the ex-governor of the Atrau region who fled the country, I have the same working relationship with him as with the others. So there is a possibility that Musin might stay in the West. I think that if he moves, despite of his involvement in Zhanaozen events, if he moves over this obstacle, and if he will stand by the democratic forces, I think that this is going to be the right decision, and we must not judge him for this decision. These words appear to be quite a straightforward and direct offer extended to Musin to join the camp of Nursultan Nazarbayev's opponents abroad. Aslan Musin's reply: Rahat Aliyev was tried by Kazakhstan courts and was found guilty. I never had any contacts with him, I don't have them now, and there couldn't be any by definition. It looks like he wants to put these rumors to rest and end the story with the failed escape for good. Observers say that it's likely the parties agreed on Musin's return to Kazakhstan, but with the head of the state guarantees of leaving alone his family and friends. At the same time, Musin remains Nazarbayev's ardent supporter, ready to work at any position he is entrusted with. Next on Vlast KZ. Journalistic conscience. Bringing president's will into life through the adoption of the ethic code for reporters. The moral and ethic guidelines in the matter of conscience. Bahit's happiness. The 6-year-old Bahit was born in slavery on the outskirts of Moscow. Expect no wedding. The ancient Kyrgyz custom of bride kidnapping gets a modern interpretation. We will return in a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublicas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы. В Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook. facebook.com/respublica.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале KplusTV.
Как заметила телекритик Ирина Петровская,
Prominent Russian TV critic Irina Petrovskaya says that television is changing shape, and the trend of dumbling down journalism is quite obvious to everyone.
птицы высокого полета Светланы Сорокиной.
Petrovskaya refers to a recent pickup by the NTV, a popular Russian channel, which used to be a quality journalistic flagship in the 90s. This season, the channel completed its fall by launching a show hosted by a Russian meme character Sveta, a typical Putin's fan. Indeed, such audience embodies how people see real Putin supporters and what Russian authorities need them to be: inactive, indifferent, and with no future to talk of. The only thing they really need to is to not get in the way of holding on to power.
аморфное, без будущего.
In this context, Kazakhstan is not too far off Russia, and in some ways is even ahead when it comes to young people and information policies. The latter is characterized by the lack of critical thinking, overinflated self-censorship, ever-increasing personality cult worshipping, propaganda reporting, etc. All this thanks to the wisdom and guidance of the beloved ruling party, to the point when it seems that Russian meme characters are now working for all local TV channels.
Пропаганда успехов, те же зияющие высоты.
The first paragraph of the Code of Ethics for Journalists of Kazakhstan reads as follows. Code 1. The journalist is to act in favor of profession, freedom of speech and information, maintaining domestic stability, interreligious and interethnic concord, national informational security, and public morality. For comparison, the Code of Honor for American journalists begins with the phrase, "Any information from all sources is subject to be verified in a diligent manner in order to prevent mistakes. Intentional misrepresentation of information is unacceptable under any circumstances." The absolute difference in the wording of Kazakhstan and the United States codes. The Bill of Ethics for Kazakh journalists is based on a wordplay and the substitution of its meaning. On October 30th, mass media officials and management of state-run media have gathered in this media center of Astana, 4 months later after the President Nazarbayev voiced the need for the Code of Professional Ethics for journalists. Not too long ago, the head of Journalists Union, Seyit Kazım Ataev, himself questioned whether the new policies would cause legal prosecution of reporters, but in the end he managed to get over his liberalistic views on journalism and personally directed the unanimous vote. According to the code, the journalist is subjected to moral censure. In this case, let us vote. Thank you. Paragraph 8.3 of Code of Ethics for Journalists states, violation of the Code of Ethics for Journalists leads to a moral censure. This point about moral censure is completely idiotic. We're going back to the Soviet Union times, aren't we? That is nothing but utter nonsense. Hence, I believe that this document is not justified and is not needed. And most importantly, it is irrelevant. The journalist of Uralskaya Nedelya Lukman Akhmedyarov received the Peter Mackler Award in the U.S. for objective coverage of events in countries that suppress free media. Lukman constantly criticizes the corrupt local government and incumbent president's regime of personal power. This spring, Akhmedyarov was severely beaten near his house. Back then, the reporter linked the assault to his professional activity. Thus, the Article 3.1 of the Code applies to his case. Paragraph 3.1 of Code of Ethics for Journalists states, the journalist is to commit to honesty and impartiality, rejecting any attempts of outside pressure. For his commitment to honesty and impartiality, Lukman experienced an assassination attempt, or at least an outside pressure. This is a kind of feedback to Nursultan Nazarbayev. I propose to him to create the ethics code of the president. I would start with this first, and one of its clauses should stipulate that one person is unable to hold the position for more than 2 terms, and that these terms are limited as well by 4 or 5 years. И эти сроки строго ограничены по 5 лет или по 4 года. According to the head of the Editors-in-Chief Club, Kinjabalat Joldabay, 213 members of this organization from across the country drafted this document. We tried to get more detailed comments from him on the reason the code turned out this way. We followed the objectivity principles while gathering information, which, by the way, are promoted by the code, and contacted Kinjabalat by phone. I cannot. I have a meeting at the moment. When can we arrange a meeting for the interview? I am very busy. I will call you later. We have not received a return call from him just yet. Some of the editors who ratified the code even suggested establishing a review committee for unethical behavior. Should there be any instances of such kind, ramifications will follow. Perhaps we need to create some sort of committee to oversee the work of certain media, which crosses the limits that are set in this document. If such an article was published, regardless of who is an editor and who ordered it, let's speak up. Let's point out that it is wrong and does not comply with the journalist's code of ethics. In other words, let us judge it ourselves. I am ready for this. The first official to congratulate the journalist with new rules of conduct was the Minister of Culture, Darkhan Manbay. Signing a journalist code of ethics in the Republic of Kazakhstan is the beginning of a new stage in the development of the field and indicates the high corporate spirit of Kazakhstan's journalism. The code is a tool of self-discipline and a moral compass. It allows for the achievement of trust and respect towards journalists and the media. Just the night before the Code of Ethics for Journalists was adopted, the OSCE Media Freedom representative Dunya Miyatovich paid an official visit to Kazakhstan. According to Miyatovich's report, she recommends Kazakhstan to continue media reform efforts. The European official suggested to completely decriminalize defamation in Kazakhstan. In addition, she welcomed the Code of Ethics adopted by the Kazakh Union of Journalists. Miyatovich referred to the code as an important step to strengthen the journalistic profession and urged the journalists to use the code as a tool that may lead to the establishment of a self-regulatory body. Meanwhile, those who are aware of what they're dealing with and what it may lead to reacted quite differently. I cried. High corporate spirit is cool. I'm really starting to think of immigration. I'm stifling here. So everywhere we look, we see the wise hand of the leader of the nation. By the way, Stalin was also a linguistic specialist. Now, every fart in our country has historical meaning, thanks to wise politics. Salima, hang in there. The pendulum will soon start swinging. I would like to congratulate Kazakh flushers with an historical event, as the ethics code of flushers was approved. The first rule of the Journalist Ethics Code is you never talk about the Journalist Ethics Code. While the code has been unanimously adopted on left bank, on the right bank of the capital, human rights and NGO activists discussed whether civil society is capable of influencing the government. Since the beginning of 2012, there are over 10 criminal cases initiated against the journalist on defamation charges and over 70 civil suits against the journalist for offending the honor and dignity. I believe our legislation is already strict enough to adopt any additional bills. Just 3 years ago, Karaganda Media Society has planted an alley of ethical media sources. Trees serve as a symbol of pre-trial settlement of conflicts. However, the penal code articles that allow to fine and even arrest journalists for defamation in Kazakhstan are still actively being used. If this code would have replaced them, then it could have a totally different meaning, but that did not happen.
Before we move on, let's take a look at some statistical data. According to the recent UN report, every fourth labor immigrant in Russia lives in conditions which can be actually classified as typical slavery. Topic researchers cite cases when immigrants live in basements, at construction sites, and even under square counters, their passports withheld by employers unable to leave and subjected to extended unpaid labor and violence. It appears this is just the tip of the iceberg. Last week, news agencies reported one such story. 20 people were kept in captivity in stores located to the northeast of Moscow. Among them was a 6-year-old Kazakh boy named Bakhyt. He spent his entire life in a small store on the outskirts of Moscow. Bakhyt, which means happiness in Kazakh, was born in slavery.
Hello, where do you keep people here? A seemingly simple storage area inside a retail store in Moscow's residential district. People asking this strange question are searching one room after another. They are on a mission to rescue people from slavery. These people, as it turns out, are citizens of Kazakhstan. We are not going to take you anywhere. Let us just talk. Are you from Shymkent, Kazakhstan? The volunteers' attempt to lead the woman outside the store to talk is met with a barricade of either security guards or store attendants. It is not clear as of yet. But here they are distracted by a scene impossible to ignore. The story of a mother's reunion with her daughter, who was held captive in this very store for 10 years, will be featured in all of Moscow's newspapers. Like Yakasimova, who spent 10 years in a single store, will grow wary of numerous camera lenses pointed at her 3 days after her release. Why are you filming? But not filming this complex story is impossible. Who will believe in a story of slavery inside a store, even on the outskirts, but on the outskirts of Moscow? As it turns out, even stranger things can happen. You haven't been out on the street for 10 years. Yes, yesterday and today was my second time. She's laughing at the fact that it sounds unbelievable even to her. Even more unbelievable are details of their life inside the storage room. Leyla Ashirova, the second woman in the video, is from Shymkent. She has been working for 10 years without the right to correspondence. This is the second day after the rescue. The volunteers' small office is barely coping with the influx of visitors. Volunteers are solving housing, food and document issues, while the men and women cannot even find time to eat, with the media demanding more details. Can we let them eat in peace? The small hallway is packed with clothes, and a poster of the nervous system is quite timely. Everyone is on edge from lack of sleep. Stop filming. Why are you filming? We step outside with one of the activists to find out more, including why did he save Kazakh citizens in Moscow. The answer is simple. We were asked to. I think every normal person should help out if he is asked to. We have no specialized organization for the release of slaves. We have Oleg Melnikov's Alternativa public movement, as well as our transhumanist community. Humanists and alternatives were asked for help by the captive women's mothers. They saw Oleg Melnikov's phone number on the internet. Oleg has experience in releasing slaves from captivity in Dagestan.
Берите руку от нее. Берите руки от нее. Берите. Это моя. Сейчас подъедет милиция, разберется.
But before turning to the volunteers, the mothers appealed to the embassy of Kazakhstan, where they were sent to the police office of the district where that store was located. Are you planning to visit the consulate? No. When I came here in May, I was looking for them in tears for 3 days during the holidays. I asked the consulate for help, but they did not, and only sent me to the Galyanov Department of Internal Affairs. This is the photograph of that document dated May 2nd. Half a year later, she was finally able to find her daughter Zarina with the activists' help. 6 years ago, Tajira became a grandmother to a child born in captivity. Meanwhile, the phrase Galyanov Department of Internal Affairs may become synonymous with the phrase bad cop. It is this department that is being accused of cooperating with the slave owners by those who kept them captive, as well as those who helped in their release. The Galyanov DIA not only refused to help, they interfered in our work. They attempted to press charges against them for illegal immigration. The women confirmed that they attempted to run away and turn to the police. In return, this is what they heard. Returned to the police, they told us they would help, and made us think they were driving us to the airport while they were returning us to the owners. Rahimjan Balkibekov is the brightest young man in the shots of the release, where he violently tries to pull away Oleg Melnikov in a red t-shirt. He's introduced as the son of the store owner in the first news stories. Here he is on the couch inside the volunteer's office, slightly upset but trying not to show it. Oleg Melnikov is now his best friend. Oleg would not let the police detain us. He did not leave us helpless. He told them we need warm clothes and food. He says he had to act like that at the store so that there would be no suspicion of his ties with the volunteers. After all, he was in this store for an entire year and knew how it might end for him. They beat us, gave us expired food, and kept us under surveillance of 20 cameras. In the apartment walk-up, he is the first to tell us what happened there. He arrived from Taraz a year ago in search of a good salary and a fun life. In pursuit of these goals, he even dropped out of college, where he studied to be an electrician. But these goals turned out to be not as he imagined. The formerly captive men and women say that store owners themselves come from Kazakhstan. Promising a life of riches, Zhantai Sabekova and Kanat Muzdymov have lured in many. They paid for transportation costs, met them at the train station, and drove them to the store. And then everything began to change. They did not pay them money, took away their documents. This isn't the case of withheld salaries. These peoples were enslaved. These now Russian citizens did not only use their former compatriots' free labor. From what Leyla and Bakia are saying, your hair stands on end. As for the children, they were born several years ago and forcibly taken away from them. Afterwards, they were told they do not know where their children are, even saying they might be dead. She took my child to Kazakhstan. In 3 years, she said, my child died. How so? She said she was sick. Who are your children from? The women leave this question unanswered. There are more important questions to which there may be answers. I have good news. Our police reports were accepted, and there may be a first criminal case on slavery. But it surprises us that official authorities are not commenting on the situation. They want to cover it up, but we will not leave it like that. Believing this is simply impossible. None of those freed have documents. Most of them are Kazakh citizens, yet the embassy of Kazakhstan stays silent. The Dr. Lisa Fund provides food and clothing for them, while Russian volunteers and activists are working on their documents. While they're being done, money for housing is being collected across the entire world, some of which was allocated by KplusTV channel, but they are still in need of our help. Raskul, 14 years old, citizen of Kazakhstan. Rahimjan Bilkibekov, 18 years old, citizen of Kazakhstan. Amir, son of Saltanat Kyrgyzbaeva, who went missing 4 months ago. Zarina Ashirova, 20 years old, citizen of Kazakhstan. Janarke Bikturgan, 23-year-old, citizen of Kazakhstan. Silakhan Daribayev, 36 years old, citizen of Kazakhstan. Bakiya Kasimova, 35-year-old, citizen of Uzbekistan and ethnic Kazakh. Bakhit, 6 years old, born and raised inside the store's basement of northeastern Moscow.
In conclusion, a story from Bishkek about the ancient custom of alakachu, bride kidnapping. In modern civil society, it predictably clashes with the criminal code and civilized life in general. There have been cases when kidnapped girls committed suicide following such forced marriages. The issue is now actively discussed in the country's parliament and was recently brought into spotlight again after a scandal linked to one of the assistant MPs kidnapping a girl who didn't seem to find it all that fun. It took a long while to persuade Ainura into giving an interview. She finally agreed to speak on condition of full anonymity. It's not herself she feels ashamed of, but the story she had been through. Ainura was kidnapped by her husband-to-be. There was no romantic marriage proposal or wedding ceremony, not even a formal registration or father's blessing. There was only a car she was roughly hustled into and bruises the morning after to remind of the so-to-say wedding night. Well, I had to stay there because my parents told me to. That is how the 18-year-old girl got married. Not to become a disgrace to her parents, Ainura resigned herself to the new husband and lived with his family for 2 months. When she could no longer bear the tormentor, she managed to escape to the capital city and had an abortion. It's been 2 years now. Ainura was able to get a job and rent an apartment. Her life seems to be getting down. Her life seems to be settling down. However, the father's wrath stops her from going back to Naryn. He not only dishonored me, he also ruined my life. I'm all alone, in exile from the parents' home. My mom calls me sometimes, but they don't seem to want me back. What I did is considered a disgrace back home. Ainura's story is still a happy ending. At least she found strength and courage to move on, unlike the other women. 3 captive brides took their own lives in the past 3 years in Kyrgyzstan. These dismal statistics, combined with 1,500 reports from victims against only 1 custodial sanction, roused the deputy Ainura Altenbaeva to action. She turned her colleagues' attention to the problem and initiated the legislation amendments to stiffen sanction against bride kidnapping. The changes stipulate for the term of imprisonment for bride kidnapping increased from 3 to 10 years. There are 3 articles in the criminal code. Kidnapping is punished by 10 years of imprisonment. Cattle abduction is subject to 11-year sanction, while articles 154 and 155 provide for up to 3 years of confinement or imposing a fine. But no fine will bring the suicide women back to life. However, the proposed amendment didn't secure enough votes at the first reading. That's when the lawmakers were showered with accusations.
There was a history of slavery in the United States. And the argument then that you suggest would say, well, since it's a historical precedent, we should continue it. But clearly, under no circumstance should anyone of any color, race, religion be held in subjugation, be held in slavery. And I think that analogy certainly applies in this circumstance.
Рабство, оно на самом деле до сих пор есть в Америке.
Slavery still exists in America, so no need for those ponderisms about slavery and bride kidnapping. A miserable Mexican who illegally crossed the border to earn $3 and survive another day is a good example of slavery. Shirina Itmatova is the MP whose assistant reportedly kidnapped a bride. The deputy herself condemns abduction. However, she insists that the pro-American organizations pile it up by comparing ancient Kyrgyz traditions to the slave-holding system in the United States. As for the scandal around her assistant who allegedly bride-napped a local channel journalist, Shirin believes that the whole situation has been misrepresented.
Девушка на самом деле в последний момент...
He told me that they had been dating for a couple of years and then broke up. She decided to marry another man, but at the very last moment she changed her mind and turned to him. That's his version of events.
Поругались, и она решила выходить замуж за другого.
The doctor of historical sciences Zhenish Junashaliyev says that the bride napping tradition, alakachu, extends back to over 3,000 years. In old times, when the Kyrgyz families on a friendly footing wanted to ally, they were making a verbal agreement to intermarry their children once they grow up. At that point, the groom's family would start paying out the so-called bride price. This was a form of compensation to the girl's parents for the kind of adoption by another family. However, a lot could change while the children were growing up. After all, there could be a better candidate to marry the girl.
Вот в таких случаях кыргызы придумали очень умно. Найдется подходящая партия.
The Kyrgyz found a clever way to solve the situation. When they'd find a desirable marriage alliance, they would collude to stage the bride kidnapping. The abductor's party then would reimburse the bride price to the groom's parents. Once the debt is paid off, the commitments would cease.
Понимаете? Родители мальчика, жениха, отдали, на этом конец.
This kind of buy-off to the groom's family at a loss would help to avoid blood feud. But today, the historians say, the young people tend to misinterpret the point of alakachu. By kidnapping young women, they violate both the law and ancient tradition. The expert in women's rights protection, Guljamal Sultanaliyeva, is researching into what spurs the young men to engage in bride napping.
Мужчины, говорят о том, что, к сожалению, у них нет финансовых средств.
Most men explain that the lack of finance won't let them to make a decent approach to a woman and get properly acquainted. Meanwhile, they reach the point when making a family is critical, as the elderly parents need help around the house. That's why marriage by abduction is one of the desperate measures. Last week, as the parliament got into the second reading of amendments to the bride kidnapping law, the protest under the violence-free family slogan was held by the parliament building. The protest movement organizers entered the building and handed around the little boxes with a posy and a letter inside. The letter told the story of a girl named Bakhtagul who attempted a suicide after being kidnapped. Saved by the doctors, she became maimed for life. Bakhtagul, the author of the letter, begged the deputies to adopt the amendments, and that's what the parliament members finally did. Ainura hardly watched the situation around the parliament. The news of the law becoming stiffer towards her offender didn't bring much relief to the young woman. She's not going to file a police report anyway. 2 years back, her family forbade doing that for the fear to lose face. And today, it's too late to change anything. You were watching Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel. Trends, highlights and personalities of the past week. Goodbye.
Всего вам доброго и до новых встреч.